Weeping may spend the night, but joy comes in the morning. "12.6 seconds. I timed it. Over and over and over and over again, I timed it 12.6 seconds. I timed it over and over again, and then it did all of the averaging in my head, and what I came up with was 12.6 seconds. Shortly after I moved to Washington, D.C., I found myself with the privilege of attending that wonderful institution, the Department of Motor Vehicles. Why are you laughing? And you came into a fascinating room. You could actually go online, and this is really amazing. You can go online and look through a webcam to see how bad the waiting room is. And you get into the waiting room, and my favorite part of the waiting room is a sign in the corner that says, "Follow us on Twitter." Why would you want to follow the DMV on Twitter? And you get into a room, and theoretically you have a lot in common with these other forlorn folk who are sitting in this room. The chairs aren't terribly uncomfortable, and you try to figure out that wonderful secret handshake within society where you don't sit right next to the person when there's several seats, so you try to sit a little bit further away, but if you sit in the far corner you look odd, and you try to work all of those societal norms out as you walk into this room full of people all waiting for the same sort of thing. And you walk in the room, and I don't know if you've noticed this, but when you walk into a crowded room of people waiting, there seems to be some situational norms that you don't initially look at the person who's come in the room, at least not in the face. That gives them a chance to look at all of you and see your faces, and then after a prescribed amount of time, that person looks down to get their seat, and that's when you else who are in the room can look at them. That way you can check each other out without anybody making eye contact. And then you sit in your seat, and instead of having a conversation with the person next to you, who you have a lot in common with, how long have you been waiting here? That's a nice sweater. What are you in for? Whatever it is, you don't. At least they didn't, and I didn't. You sit there in an awkward silence. And then after a while, it turns out the average is 12.6 seconds, everybody takes out their cell phones. Because that way, even if you're not doing anything, you're emailing, you're checking your Twitter, maybe you're looking at the DMV on Twitter, I don't know. You are looking at your phone because then at least you don't have to look at each other. Then at least you don't have to make conversation. That's what we do with our boredom, at least after 12.6 seconds of boredom. And I can't look down too much on them because, of course, instead of looking at my cell phone, I was timing people to see how long it took them to get their cell phones out and doing the math in my head. Years ago, back in a land where Jesus walked around, they didn't, of course, have Twitter, so they couldn't check how the DMV was doing. They did what they did from time immemorial, at least what the stereotype of groups of men did from time immemorial. Pete looked at Tom and Nate and the Zebedee boys and two others and said, "I'm going fishing." And the other said, "Sure, yeah, okay, I'll go fishing too." And they all went out and they fished. To be fair, maybe it wasn't boredom. They had just come from this time of following Jesus around. And then he was crucified. And then he came back. And then they thought, now what are we supposed to do? They went back to what they knew. A lot of them were fishermen. I guess we'll go fishing. They just had all of these life-altering events. Perhaps you've had them too. They've just come through this life-altering time in their lives Perhaps you know what that's like. Perhaps you're in one now. They just had this life-altering presence come to them and break into their lives, and now they didn't know what to do with it. What now? I guess we'll go back to what we're comfortable with, what we already know about. But now, after that life-changing thing, it doesn't quite feel the same. It doesn't quite work out the same way that it used to. For Pete, Tom, Nate, and the rest, they didn't catch any fish. Going back to the old ways, going back to what you knew, doesn't seem to quite hold your attention, doesn't quite seem to fulfill you in the way that perhaps it did before. After you've had some life-changing event, checking your cell phone, doing whatever it is, just fills up time. And it doesn't do anything for you. And for them, after catching no fish through the night, this joker appears on the shore. They don't know it's Jesus yet, and he says the thing that they've always said to fishermen. Are they biting? Did you catch anything? No, we didn't catch anything. And then he says the unexpected thing. Why don't you try the other side of the boat? Now, the gospel is silent on what they might be muttering under their breath. I have a feeling for most of us, we'd have a few choice words that probably would not make it into the Bible. Try the other side of the boat? What, are you kidding me? I've been fishing all of my life, and not the throw a line out there kind of fishing, but those skilled hands that know exactly what they're doing, casting the nets. They know exactly what they're doing. They do it time and time again. They just spent all night doing it. And you say, try the other side of the boat? Maybe the fish are over there. Oh, sure, we didn't think of that. But they do it. And lo and behold, we know the rest of the story. They catch a ridiculous amount of fish. And then the disciple, it says in the Gospel of John, the disciple who Jesus loved. It's an odd phrase, isn't it? A lot of scholars in the past have said that is John. Well, of course, the Gospel could have just said John. But no, it said the disciple whom Jesus loved, leaving it open to mystery. Maybe that's the community of faith that held together this gospel before it was written down. Maybe that's what they used in amongst themselves. Maybe we are supposed to see ourselves in that place, the disciples whom Jesus loved. In that moment, he says, that's Jesus. That's the Lord. Now, why did he say that? How is it that in that moment he recognized God? I think for us, looking at what had happened, they were asked to do something unexpected. And the result was something miraculous. I think that's part of what it was that was the telltale thing. When you're asked to do something unexpected and you do it, sometimes even surprising yourself, and something even more unexpected comes out of it. For most of us, what we may have done before our encounters with the divine aren't things that need to be abandoned. The fishing of these people didn't end. Jesus never told them, stop fishing, don't ever fish again. But it's transformed somehow. Here in the psalm, we have this wonderful phrase, weeping may spend the night, but joy comes in the morning. I don't know about you, but I've heard many wonderful sermons on that verse. We've had those horrible times in our life, and we need a verse of hope. And we've had joyous times. We've had mountaintop experiences, and we celebrate them. But let's be honest, at least in this country and most of the first world, we have a dangerous privilege of most of our life being kind of Not being mountaintop, not being the pits of despair, but being somewhere in the middle, and we find ourselves a little bored, looking for those cell phones, looking for things to amuse ourselves. And the dangerous privilege is we can get lost in that. We can fill our time trying to just get by, to just try to amuse ourselves enough to get through to the next thing, killing time. What do we do with those moments? We have horrible times and we look for faith, and we look for hope, and we have joyous times and hopefully we give great thanks in those moments. The church is growing, the faith is growing very strongly in places in the world where there is oppression, but where things are generally okay, where you're only hungry because you skipped breakfast because you got up too late this morning. You're not hungry because you didn't eat yesterday or the day before. Everything's kind of okay. And we just go along, and perhaps we're not searching for anything. There are churches and places that try to preach, if you don't have a mountaintop experience every second of every day, if you are not feeling the joyous presence of God now and seeing wonderful smiling faces out there everywhere, then maybe you never encountered God in the first place. Maybe you've heard that message out there. But most of life is kind of in the in-between, and we need to search for ways to be inspired through our everyday life, to see God in those moments. Part of what we do is we gather together as a community of faith to hear those stories, to experience baptism, to get refreshed with our Eucharist, to hear each other's stories, to hear the mountaintop stories of the people around us. That dangerous privilege extends to a problematic dilemma we have when we send youth on work camps, when our teaching programs have pilgrimages, when we have people go to places like Honduras from the parish to do mission work. You come back inspired, and then eventually, like so many disciples by the water, you think, what's next? Maybe I'll go fishing. And then Jesus once again breaks into our lives in unexpected ways and asks us to do something a little bit different. Try fishing on the other side of the boat. What, are you kidding me? And maybe we should expect something miraculous and unexpected to happen. Jesus says to Peter at the end of our gospel lesson today, "Do you love me?" "Yeah, I love you." "Do you love me?" "Why you keep asking?" "Do you love me?" Sometimes we have to be asked over and over again to break out of our humdrumness, our that we spend so much of our time in. The good news is Jesus is known to call people more than once. Jesus went around and gathered disciples. It's in the first chapter of this gospel. That perhaps, if you read it the way that John has written it out, perhaps Peter is the third disciple to follow Jesus. He says, "Follow me." And here at the end, he says to Peter again, "Follow me." If you felt some sort of mountaintop experience because of the first time you really got involved in church, or perhaps you've been just coming to church because mom and dad make you, and that's all right, and you're looking for it for the first time, or you're looking for it for the 4th time, or the 1,000th time, look for it again, because Jesus will keep coming to us. If you find yourself in that daze of picking out your cell phone after 12.6 seconds, look for a possibility, something unexpected. Because Jesus is there, God is there to inspire you in those moments too. And if all else fails, try fishing on the other side of the boat.